this generation has an imagination that's different than us. And for those of us that are older, I'm a Gen Xer, it's important for us to realize that God gives every generation an imagination. And Urbana has always been about helping a generation kind of connect with the imagination of God.
Welcome to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, where we help you experience and bring renewal to your mission field. Join us and receive free resources at innovativechurchleaders.org. On today's episode of the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, I have with me Mark Matlock. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great, Eric. Glad to be with you today.
Well, thanks for joining us. You have held many notable roles in life. I remember you in the youth specialties days. Now you're certainly involved as a senior fellow at Barna.com, but you're also the executive director of Urbana 2025 InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I would just love to get your perspective. There's pastors, church leaders listening. You have a chance to interact with folks all across the USA. What's giving you encouragement? What are you seeing God doing in and through the ministries you're a part of and those you're partnering with?
Well, I think, I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing with the emerging generation, Gen Z. At Barna, we've described them in the past, and I Carrie Newhoff also kind of used this phrase quite a bit of, Gen Z is in revival and retreat. Some of them are pulling away from Christ. Some of them are leaning in. But I think probably the most interesting aspect is how deeply and strongly they are leaning in to Jesus. And I see God at work with them. And as I'm preparing for Urbana, seeing this kind of filling of this generation leads to, just seeing the way God's moved in revival-like situations leads to fruitfulness. And Urbana is all about, okay, Lord, this is what you're doing. Now, what am I supposed to do about it? So I'm really curious to see how God uses that at Urbana this December as we see a generation really contemplate, okay, where is God leading us to act in the world? Because the world is very different for Gen Z as they look at it than it was for us when we were their age.
Absolutely. And it's really, I think it's a really interesting way that you've kind of moved from youth specialties to Urbana. I'm sure there have been other things in between, your WisdomWorks as well. But I think it's really interesting because you have your pulse on kind of young adults right now. Urbana is not in Urbana this year. It's in
That's
Phoenix.
correct. It's in Phoenix. Yeah. Always got to say that. Yeah, because I forget how many people strongly associate it with the University of Illinois. Yeah.
Well, and it's, such a important place. I mean, Urbana, not just the city, but I mean, this conference has launched young adults into the world as missionaries. I mean, when I think of Urbana, I think of Billy Graham, back in the day. Talk about what is Urbana like now? Who are the folks that pastors and church leaders should be sending there? Talk a little bit about what you're hoping to see happen this year.
Well, when I took on the role of executive director of Urbana, I attended Urbana one time in 1990, and that it changed my life. I went into youth ministry after that, actually. And I actually am kind of an interesting story because I went to Urbana already planning to be a missionary. I was studying to be an anthropological consultant for Wycliffe. That's what I thought I was going to do. I thought that was the trajectory. And when I went to Urbana, which is kind of this moment of really contemplating complete surrender to God with your life, I said, Lord, wherever you want me to go, I'll go. Surprisingly, that was not into Bible translation work, but it was into youth ministry, which was not what was on my trajectory. So opening that up really allowed for that to happen. But, the world has changed since 1990. And when I was there, that was the big emphasis was Bible translation. Actually, we need more Bible translators. A lot of my friends surrendered to go into Bible translation during that time. And now Wycliffe isn't even going to be recruiting translators because that's not the nature of the work anymore in terms of how God's accomplishing that. It's just really, for North Americans at least. So it's a really interesting just moment because the world has changed. The global church is now in the majority South. The majority church is in the global South. So the locus of the church has really changed globally. And North Americans have different ways of engaging the Great Commission. So this generation has an imagination that's different than us. And for those of us that are older, I'm a Gen Xer, it's important for us to realize that God gives every generation an imagination. And Urbana has always been about helping a generation kind of connect with the imagination of God. And, it was founded on three kind of really important questions. One, what is God doing in the world right now? What is God saying to us right now through his word? What does God want us to do about it? And we're really leaning into that as we prepare and plan Urbana 25. They'll be happening this December in Phoenix, helping a generation answer that question. And the way they answer those questions will be very different than the way we did in 1990. I'm excited about that.
Well, you're going into Bible translation for the nations, but you still did Bible translation, just helping young adults, teenagers understand the Bible. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
excited about.
Recruited a lot of young people that were at our conferences. Actually, got exposed to Bible translation through that, and I would every now and then get letters from the president of Wycliffe saying, "Hey, I just met these students today. These new Wycliffe people. They actually learned about Wycliffe at your conference." So we
That's
were always
fantastic.
trying to introduce students to what God was doing around the world.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Well, urbana.org for more information. I know one of the sponsors is True Center. They're giving a free assessment to everybody who comes, a really
yeah.
great assessment on motivation. Who are some of the other speakers? What are some of the other activities and events that are happening around it?
Yeah. So every morning we study the book of Jonah. So we haven't studied the book of Jonah since 1987 at Urbana. So, and it's an interesting event because it happens every 3 years. So, I mean, I know when I was 20 something, I didn't know what Urbana was. And because it happens every 3 years, it's not like, oh, that thing we went to last year is happening again. It's like a whole new generation every 3 years. So we really rely on, those who have been in the past, older shepherds, of young people to say, hey, this is a place to kind of set the direction for your adult life. Go to Urbana and it will help. And the True Center assessment is one thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to actually give everybody an opportunity to understand how they're wired, their core motivations. And then throughout the conference, we'll be unpacking a little bit about, so what does that mean? How does that translate into me doing kingdom work in the world? We got a lot of great speakers. We got Nicole Martin, Jenny Allen, John Tyson, Lisa Pack. There's voices from all over the world that will be there as well that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but will become more familiar with them once they come to Urbana. John Tyson will be the Bible expositor in the morning, and Ann Zaki from Egypt is also going to be doing some spiritual formation moments in the morning as well. So it's going to be a lot of really exciting things happening while we're there. And we have over 50 organizations that have partnered with us and actually been on a kind of different process this year. But these 50, 60 organizations went on a 1.5 year learning journey together, talking about what is God doing with Gen Z? How do we engage them at Urbana? And so we're creating kind of a really interesting kind of way to interface. And there's literally like 150 seminars on things that are happening all over the world. So if you're interested in creation care, if you're interested in sex trafficking, how do we fight against that? All of these things, ways that Christians show up in the world to declare the gospel and to demonstrate the gospel, all of those things are going to be on display at Urbana.
Well, it's just another amazing way to mobilize, equip our people. And I'd love to hear from your perspective as a senior fellow there at Barna. Some of the work that Barna's been showing has recently both been encouraging and discouraging. It looks like
Yeah.
there's maybe we're no longer seeing the nuns growing exponentially. Maybe that's tailing off a little bit, but you still hear things like 4% of Americans have a biblical worldview, even though 67% might claim to be Christian. What are some other things that you're learning there at Barna that you think could help us as pastors?
Yeah. Well, at Barna, the people always call us bad news Barna, or they say we have the spiritual gift of discouragement. And reality and data kind of does that, right? A little bit. You can't, sugarcoat this, but we do think that the data is actually pretty positive. There's a lot of really interesting insights out there. A couple of the things from our State of the Church report that have been kind of interesting to us because they denote some real shifts that we haven't seen in all the decades that we at Barna have kind of studied trends of the church, faith, and culture. One of them is how females, young females, are the segment that's adding to that religiously unaffiliated group, those nuns that we were talking about. We've never seen females disassociate as strongly as we're seeing right now. And that is a real shift. We're seeing kind of the liberalization of women, particularly younger females, in their just kind of ideology and perspective in the world. That's a shift and a difference. I'll let other people debate what that means and whether that's right or wrong. I think there's a lot of reasons that contribute to that. But the other interesting thing has been how we're seeing young men kind of have a conservative spike in their outlook on the world, and they're returning to church. And so, and there's probably good and bad with that as well. But those are two really interesting trends that we're just seeing. And other research groups are noticing it as well in the research that they're doing. We're in the process of doing further research to try to understand more of the why behind it. We know that it's happening. We can only conjecture as to why.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. You can see all of the books that Mark has written there at barna.com/speaking-Mark-Matlock. And
The
recently,
Slash King.
yeah, a lot of slashes in there. Well, Faith for the Curious, Faith for Exiles, those are two books you've done recently. I'd love to hear a little bit about those two books in particular. What are some of the messages that you're trying to convey to those who are reading?
Yeah, David Kinnaman and I started doing research together, gosh, in the late 80s. He just graduated from Biola. I was running these student conferences and wanted to understand what was going on with teenagers of faith. And this was kind of the millennials rising, actually. They were like in middle school and early high school years. And we started looking at them, and that went on to David writing Unchristian with Gabe Lyons, where they were looking at how non-Christians were perceiving Christians, kind of looking at some of the issues that we have. And unfortunately, one of the frustrating things about data is like that book to me was like a clarion call to the church. Hey, pay attention to what's going on and how we are showing up in other people's eyes and the view of them. And most people ignored that. And if you look at kind of the last maybe 5, 6 years of the church, we've almost become exclusively known for the things that we just saw as issues in that book. But that kind of led David to see some things that were happening. Everybody's reporting that lots of people were leaving the church. Young people were graduating out of high school and then graduating out of the church. But not a lot of people were asking why or trying to understand it. So everybody was assuming they knew the reason why. David actually did some deeper research in a book called You Lost Me. And I helped David with some of the analysis and framing of that data. And in that, one of the things that we found was that there were all these students who were staying in church, and we weren't exploring or investigating any of that. So one of the great things about research projects is you answer some questions, but then you generate a lot more questions. So the questions were, why are these young people staying? We know now why a lot of them are leaving, but we don't know why these ones are staying. Faith for Exiles was our research into understanding the faith of young adults and why they remained in church, so that we could, as church leaders, try to figure out what we need to be doing more of. And one of the really interesting things was we did some segmentation, and we found that with 18 to 29-year-olds who had said at one point in time in my life, I identified as a Christian, or I currently do, that there were four groups. There was the prodigals. Those were people who said at one time I identified as a Christian, but I no longer identify as a Christian. And that's really important because it's not just, oh, I don't go to church anymore. And at the time that we did that research, that number was about 22%. Now, when we did the same kind of survey work for You Lost Me, that number was only 11%. So it doubled in just a little bit under 10 years. So you see that rise of that religiously unaffiliated happening during that time. The next group were the nomads. Those were people who said, you know, I'm still a Christian, but the church isn't the place where I practice my faith. I'm kind of taking my faith on the road. And we all know scripture tells us not to forsake the assembly of believers. And a lot of them, when we actually look and do deeper survey work on them, we know that they're not that far off from a prodigal in where they are. And by the way, we call them prodigals because it's more hopeful. We believe that hopefully someday they'll come back to their faith of their childhood. And then we had the other two groups that we were really looking at, and that was the habituals. Those are who were attending church frequently, but Maybe they didn't know that much about scripture. Maybe they said faith literally wasn't at the center of their life. They were kind of in a wishy-washy state with Christianity, but they were attending church regularly. And then there was another category, and this was our exemplar group called the resilient disciples, that made faith at the center, were attending church regularly. Faith was the center of their life. They're making decisions based on scripture, things of this nature. So in that work, what we found, it was really hopeful, was that a lot of the people that we need to do work with is that habitual category. That habitual segment are people that are in our church, they're attending regularly, but they're not fully formed disciples. And that's where a huge opportunity is. We were focusing so much on those that were leaving or that were outside. We were missing the boat with those that were right inside our walls that were only maybe years away from becoming nomads or prodigals. And the pandemic definitely shifted those numbers. We saw that happen, where that habitual number during the pandemic kind of migrated into that nomad prodigal category. But focusing on what can we do to help build resiliency in disciples, that was the focus of Faith for Exiles. And that book's surprisingly held up. I just taught it this weekend to a group of pastors that were on a retreat for a conference, and it's just remarkable how refreshing it is for them to go, oh, I see like what we're lacking or how we could do better in this. And it's, I don't like to beat pastors down. I think being a pastor is one of the most significant jobs that we can do in the church. It's spiritual care for a group of people. It's really, really difficult. And in this day and age, harder than ever. But hopefully this data helps us see things that we're blind to and helps us see opportunities as well that we can lean into. I don't want to necessarily give pastors a lot more work, but if a lot of what we're doing isn't producing the results that we're hoping for, then as a pastor, I'd want to know that and make adjustments as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to give away some free copies to those who are signed up to the email newsletter. If you're not already signed up, go to ericbryant.org to do that. We also are the founder of WisdomWorks, a consultancy. You help churches and faith-based organizations leverage their collective wisdom and insight to innovate and accelerate. And so how could we not ask a question of someone so wise?
I'm foolish enough to call my organization WisdomWorks.
Yeah. I like it. I love it. But I would love for you to just impart some wisdom to us as pastors. You've given us a lot of hope, a lot of things to dive into, but share a little bit more about what you would love to see happening in the hearts and lives of pastors and the churches they lead.
Well, a lot of what we've looked at when we look at discipleship is getting people to do certain behaviors and believe certain things. And I think that we're in a spiritual formation kind of era right now where we're starting to realize just reading your Bible every day, praying, going to church regularly, that isn't enough, right? Like that's not actually doing it. And that our Faith for Exiles research showed that those resilient disciples actually knew Jesus, and somehow they fought their way through all the religious clutter that we have in our lives to be able to really experience Jesus. And a lot of times as pastors, we think that we're giving people that experience, but sometimes we find out maybe that's not what's actually happening. Or we say you have to have these right beliefs in order to be, completely formed as a disciple. But what we're coming to realize is that you can have people with the right beliefs, they can have the right practices, but they're not actually formed into the person of Christ. And that requires a different kind of perspective on making disciples. And when we do our research at Barna, we ask pastors all the time, how do you think you're doing with discipleship? And, on average, pastors give themselves like a C plus. So that tells you right there, the church that's supposed to be a disciple making movement doesn't even think that they're doing a very good job at it. So I don't think we're saying anything new by focusing on that, but trying to figure out what and why and how do we do that, I think is really important. One of the projects that I worked on with WisdomWorks was helping Pete Scazzaro in the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality group, which is now Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. We were contextualizing that for teenagers, trying to understand how could he take this work that pastors and adult leaders have taken into their own life, and how do we translate that and contextualize it for young people. That was a project I was involved in for 3 years, and I know they're still continuing to work there at New Life and within the emotionally healthy discipleship world to continue that. But that was really exciting to kind of see us not just try to get young people to believe certain things, but to actually be changed and shaped by Jesus in by understanding who they are as whole people and how Jesus changes them.
Hmm. It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. You can find Mark at urbana.org or barna.com. Keep up the great work, Mark. We're so grateful for the ways you've invested in us and advanced his kingdom.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about Faith for the Curious, but that's another good one too that just came out, and it's looking at how spiritually open people are right now, which is another really hopeful message that we are living in an era of spiritual openness and in the United States, and the church has more opportunity than ever to connect people to Jesus. But we have to change a little bit the way we're thinking about the unchurched and how we connect with them in order to help them do that. But there's an opportunity there for all of us to lean into.
Excellent. Thanks again. So grateful, Mark. Thanks for listening to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and share as we bring spirit-led innovation, reach new people, and make disciples who make disciples. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter at innovativechurchleaders.org for free resources and an opportunity to join a cohort with Dr. N.T. Wright.